On the evening of the 13th of July 1870, a 60-year-old man sat down to dinner in Berlin in a foul mood. On the table beside his plate lay a telegram, an ordinary diplomatic telegram, polite, boring, describing a conversation about a German prince and a Spanish throne. The man picked up a pencil. He crossed out a few words. He did not add a single new word of his own. He simply deleted. When he was finished, 12 words were gone. He handed the shortened text to the newspapers. Within 6 weeks, two empires that did not want a war were tearing each other apart. Centuries, old French dynasty had been wiped off the map forever, and the wreckage of that single edited telegram had been set on a course that would, in time, kill more than 40 million people. History books call it the EMS dispatch. Most people have never heard of it. It is one of the most consequential acts of editing ever performed by a human hand, and the man who performed it knew exactly what he was doing. He was not guessing. He was not careless. He understood, with chilling precision, what 12 deleted words would do to two proud nations. And he did it anyway. At dinner, with a pencil, with a smile. His name was Otto von Bismarck. And this is the story of how he edited a telegram into a war into an empire, and an empire into the bloodiest century in human history. Let's walk through how 12 deleted words killed 40 million people. First, you need to understand the man holding the pencil, because the EMS dispatch was not an accident. It was the masterstroke of the most dangerous political mind of the 19th century. In 1870, Otto von Bismarck was the minister-president of Prussia, the largest and most militarized of the dozens of German-speaking states scattered across Central Europe. And Bismarck had one obsession that organized his entire life. He wanted to weld those dozens of separate German states, the kingdoms, the duchies, the free cities, the principalities, into a single unified German empire ruled from Berlin under the King of Prussia. Not as an alliance, not as a confederation, as one nation, the most powerful nation in Europe. And he understood something that every textbook summary of him gets exactly right. He believed that nations are not forged by speeches and majority votes. He believed they are forged in blood and iron. By 1870, Bismarck had already fought 2 wars to assemble his empire piece by piece. In 1864, he crushed Denmark and seized 2 German-speaking duchies. In 1866, in a lightning 7-week war, he smashed the Austrian Empire, the traditional leader of the German world, and shoved Austria out of German affairs entirely. After that war, Bismarck pulled the northern German states into a tight federation under Prussian control. But the southern German states, Bavaria, Württemberg, Baden, the rich Catholic, independent-minded south, remained outside. They did not want to be ruled from Protestant Prussian Berlin. Bismarck needed one more thing to drag them in. He needed an external enemy so frightening, so threatening to all Germans that the proud South would beg Prussia for protection. He needed a war that Germany did not start. He needed France to attack him. Across the Rhine sat exactly the enemy he needed. The Second French Empire, ruled by Napoleon III, the nephew of the great Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon III had seized power in a coup, crowned himself emperor, and spent 2 decades chasing the glory of his legendary uncle. But by 1870, his regime was sick. He was physically ill, in agonizing pain from a bladder stone. His government was unstable. His army was widely believed to be the finest in Europe, but it had not fought a major European power in years. And Napoleon III had watched Bismarck's Prussia grow from a regional kingdom into a colossus on his eastern border, and it terrified him. France could not allow a single unified Germany to rise. A Germany of 40 million people, unified, industrialized, and militarized, would overshadow France forever. Both men knew it. Both men were circling the same war. The only question was who would be blamed for starting it, and Bismarck had already decided the answer would be France. Now we get to the spark, and the spark, as so often in history, was something that on its surface had almost nothing to do with the war it caused. In 1868, a revolution in Spain threw out the reigning queen and left the Spanish throne vacant. For nearly 2 years, Spanish politicians searched Europe for a suitable prince to invite to become their new king. In 1870, they offered the crown to a German prince named Leopold of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen. And here is the detail that turned a routine succession question into a continental crisis. Prince Leopold was a Hohenzollern, the same royal family as the King of Prussia. To the French, the implication was a nightmare. If a Hohenzollern prince sat on the throne of Spain, while another Hohenzollern, the King of Prussia, ruled the growing German power to the east, then France would be surrounded. Hohenzollerns on two borders, encircled, exactly the way the first Napoleon had once encircled the rest of Europe. To Paris, this was intolerable, and Bismarck, who had quietly encouraged the Spanish offer behind the scenes, knew that it would be. The French government exploded. In early July 1870, French ministers stood up and effectively threatened war if the Hohenzollern candidacy was not withdrawn. The French ambassador was dispatched to confront the King of Prussia directly, not Bismarck. The king, Wilhelm I, the aging, courtly, fundamentally cautious King of Prussia who, unlike his minister, did not actually want a war and was perfectly willing to defuse the crisis politely. And at first, that is exactly what happened. Faced with the threat of war, Prince Leopold's father withdrew the candidacy. The prince stepped aside. France had won completely without firing a shot. The Hohenzollern threat to the Spanish throne simply evaporated. For Bismarck, sitting in Berlin, this was a catastrophe. His enemy had backed down. The crisis he needed was dissolving in front of him. He later wrote that the news of the withdrawal left him so despondent that he privately considered resigning. His war was slipping away. But then France did something extraordinarily foolish. Winning was not enough for Paris. The French foreign minister and the Empress and the war party around Napoleon III wanted total humiliation of Prussia, so they instructed their ambassador to demand more. They told him to go to the King of Prussia and demand a guarantee. Not just that this Hohenzollern candidacy was withdrawn, but a written promise that no Hohenzollern would ever, for all time, accept the Spanish throne again. A permanent, public, humiliating concession extracted from a king in person. On the morning of the 13th of July 1870, the French ambassador approached King Wilhelm I, who was taking the waters at a quiet little spa town called Bad Ems, walking on the promenade. And he delivered the demand, right there on the gravel path in public, to the king's face. King Wilhelm, to his credit, kept his composure. He was annoyed by the demand, considered it excessive, but he was unfailingly polite. He told the ambassador, courteously, that he could not make such a permanent guarantee, but that the matter was effectively closed, and he saw no reason for further conflict. He even agreed to receive the ambassador again later if there was anything more to discuss. Then he raised his hat, said good day, and walked on. A polite refusal, a diplomatic non-event, the crisis, by any reasonable reading, was over. France had its withdrawal, Prussia had kept its dignity, no war was necessary. The king's aide then sat down and composed a telegram to Berlin to Bismarck, describing exactly what had happened on the promenade. A calm, factual, civil account. And that telegram is the 1,200 miles of gunpowder. All it needed was a man with a match. The telegram from EMS reached Bismarck in Berlin on the evening of the 13th of July 1870. He was at dinner with two of the men who, with him, formed the iron core of the Prussian war machine. Across the table sat Helmuth von Moltke, the brilliant ice-cold chief of the Prussian General Staff, the man who had designed the lightning campaigns that crushed Denmark and Austria, and beside him sat Albrecht von Roon, the Minister of War. The man who had rebuilt the Prussian army into the most efficient killing machine in Europe. These three men, Bismarck, Moltke and Roon, were the architects of German unification by force. And all three were in the same despondent mood that evening the MS telegram, as originally written, described a peaceful resolution. The crisis was ending. Bismarck later wrote that the conversation at that table was gloomy. He even asked Moltke directly whether the army was truly ready for war with France. Moltke answered without hesitation. The army was ready. The sooner the war came, the better. Delay only allowed France to prepare. That was all Bismarck needed to hear. Bismarck asked for the original telegram. He read it again, and then he understood that he was not holding a document that ended a crisis. He was holding raw material. The facts in the telegram were neutral, but facts can be edited. The king's account described a polite exchange. The French ambassador had made a demand. The king had declined courteously. The king had later sent word through an aide that he had nothing further to add, and the matter was being handled normally through diplomatic channels. Long, calm, civil, full of softening phrases and procedural politeness. Bismarck picked up his pencil and he began, with surgical care, to cut. He did not lie. This is the genius and the horror of it. He added nothing false. He invented no insult that had not occurred. He simply deleted. He cut out the king's courtesies. He cut out the phrase explaining that the king would receive the ambassador again. He cut out the softening, procedural diplomatic language that made the exchange sound like two gentlemen resolving a misunderstanding. He compressed a long, polite paragraph into a few blunt sentences. In the version Bismarck released, the French ambassador had accosted the king with an insolent demand, and the king had abruptly refused and sent word that he would have nothing further to say to the ambassador. The edited telegram did not describe a polite disagreement. It described a confrontation, an insult given, and an insult returned. To French ears, it would read as, "The King of Prussia publicly snubbed our ambassador." To German ears, it would read as, "A French diplomat had the arrogance to corner our king on a public path." Bismarck later described the moment in his memoirs with unmistakable satisfaction. He said that with the deletions, but without adding or altering a single word, the telegram would now produce, in his own phrase, the effect of a red rag on the Gallic bull. He said that the shortened text would not merely be read in Paris, it would be felt as a slap in the face. And he told Moltke and Rome precisely what would happen next. He said the edited telegram would be published in the German newspapers and telegraphed to every embassy in Europe by midnight. The French press would read it the next morning on the 14th of July, the anniversary of the storming of the Bastille, the most patriotic day on the French calendar. And France, in a fury of wounded national pride, would declare war on Prussia, making France the aggressor, making Prussia the victim, and ensuring that when the war came, the proud southern German states, Bavaria and the rest, would rally to Prussia's side against the French invader. Bismarck said all of this at the dinner table in advance as a prediction, and the two generals who a moment earlier had been despondent suddenly recovered their appetites. This is the part that should chill you. He was not hoping, he was not gambling. Bismarck read the psychology of two entire nations, the way an engineer reads a blueprint. He knew exactly which 12 words to remove to convert a peaceful telegram into a casus belli. He knew the date it would land. He knew the mood it would land into. He knew how the French press would frame it, how the French street would react, how the French government, already cornered by its own war party, would have no choice but to respond with war. He predicted the deaths of tens of thousands of men over a working dinner, and he was right about every step. Everything Bismarck predicted happened on schedule. The edited dispatch hit the German newspapers on the evening of the 13th of July and the French newspapers the next morning, the 14th of July. Paris erupted. Crowds surged into the streets shouting for war. The newspapers screamed that the King of Prussia had insulted France and humiliated her ambassador. The French government, already pushed by its empress, its war party, and its terror of looking weak, folded completely under the pressure. On the 19th of July 1870, 6 days after Bismarck lifted his pencil, France formally declared war on Prussia, exactly as he had designed. France, the aggressor, Prussia, the wrong party defending German honor, and the southern German states, just as Bismarck had foreseen, immediately threw in their armies alongside Prussia against the French invader. In a single stroke, the obstacle to German unification, the independence of the South, was gone. The war did Bismarck's unifying work for him. But France had made a fatal error. The army it sent to war was not the machine it believed it was. On paper, French soldiers were brave and well armed, equipped with an excellent rifle and an early machine gun. But behind the paper, the French army was a disorganized mess. Mobilization was chaos, units could not find their commanders, supplies went to the wrong depots, there was no coherent war plan. The Prussian army, by contrast, was the most rigorously organized force in human history to that point. Moltke and his general staff had spent years building detailed mobilization timetables tied directly to the railway network. Every regiment knew which train to board, on which day to which front. Within 18 days, Prussia and its German allies moved nearly 500,000 men to the French frontier with a precision that the French could not begin to match. The war was a slaughter, and it was over with terrifying speed. The Germans poured across the border and won battle after battle through August. The French armies were pushed back, surrounded, and shattered. And then came the moment that ended an empire. At the beginning of September 1870, one of the two main French armies, with Emperor Napoleon III himself accompanying it, was encircled at a town called Sedan in northeastern France. Trapped against the Belgian border, pounded by German artillery from the surrounding heights, the French position was hopeless. On the 1st of September and 2nd, 1870, the Battle of Sedan destroyed the army, and Napoleon III, sick, in pain, and out of options, surrendered. In person, the Emperor of the French, the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, handed his sword to the King of Prussia, a reigning emperor captured on the battlefield. Roughly 7 weeks after Bismarck edited a telegram at his dinner table, the news of Sedan reached Paris and the Second French Empire simply collapsed. On the 4th of September 1870, crowds stormed into the legislature. The empire was declared abolished, and the republic was proclaimed. Napoleon III's dynasty, the Bonaparte, the family that had once made all of Europe tremble, was finished forever. But the war was not over. The new French Republic refused to surrender, and the Germans marched on Paris and laid siege to the city through a brutal winter. Inside the city, starving Parisians ate rats, dogs, and the animals of the city zoo. And it was here, in the depths of that siege, that Bismarck claimed his ultimate prize. On the 18th of January 1871, with Paris still under siege and German guns still firing on the French capital, Bismarck staged the most deliberate humiliation in modern European history. He did not proclaim the new German Empire in Berlin. He did not proclaim it on German soil at all. He proclaimed it inside France. In the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, the dazzling gilded heart of French royal glory, the very room built by Louis XIV to display French supremacy over all of Europe. In that room, surrounded by Prussian generals and German princes, the King of Prussia, Wilhelm I, was proclaimed Kaiser, German Emperor. The unified German Empire was born in the captured palace of its defeated enemy, while German artillery shelled the enemy's capital 12 miles away. Bavaria, Württemberg, Baden, the proud southern states that had refused for years to submit to Berlin, were now part of it. Everything Bismarck had wanted, the single unified German nation under Prussian leadership, the dominant power of the European continent, was achieved. And it had begun with a pencil and 12 deleted words. France formally surrendered 10 days later. The terms Bismarck imposed were savage, and they were chosen as carefully as the deletions in the telegram. France was forced to pay an enormous war indemnity, and France was forced to surrender 2 of her provinces to the new German Empire, Alsace, and a large part of Lorraine. Industrial provinces with iron, coal, and steel, and with cities full of people who considered themselves French. Bismarck's generals demanded these provinces for their iron and their defensive value, and Bismarck agreed. But Bismarck himself privately understood the danger. He knew that tearing Alsace and Lorraine away from France would not end the conflict between the two nations. It would freeze it. It would burn a wound into the French national soul that would not heal for a generation. Every French schoolchild for the next 44 years would be taught to look at the map, at the lost provinces shaded in morning black. And remember, to remember and to wait and to want them back. And this is where 12 deleted words begin to multiply across the decades. The Franco-Prussian War created a unified, industrialized, militarized Germany at the very center of Europe, instantly the strongest land power on the continent, and it created a France that was wounded, humiliated, and consumed by a single national obsession: revenge. And the recovery of Alsace and Lorraine. Bismarck himself spent the next 20 years desperately building a web of alliances to keep France isolated and to prevent the Great War he feared would come. But in 1890, Bismarck was forced out of office by a young, reckless new Kaiser Wilhelm II, who threw away Bismarck's careful diplomacy. Within 2 decades, Europe had divided into 2 armed camps. A Germany grown too strong and too aggressive on one side, a France hungry for revenge, allied with Russia and Britain on the other. 2 interlocking systems of alliances primed like a row of mousetraps, all of them tracing back to the war Bismarck had engineered in 1870. In 1914, the trap sprang. The First World War killed roughly 17 million people and maimed 20 million more. And one of its central facts, written into the very first war plans, was Germany's expectation that France would attack to retake Alsace and Lorraine, the provinces Bismarck had seized in 1871. And when that war ended, the victorious French dragged the defeated Germans to a railway carriage and forced upon them a peace so harsh, so humiliating, so full of the same poison of national resentment that it bred a second war even worse than the first. The treaty that ended the First World War was signed deliberately in the same Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, where the German Empire had been proclaimed in 1871. The French chose that room on purpose to answer one humiliation with another, and the rage that humiliation bred inside Germany was the soil in which a corporal named Adolf Hitler grew his movement. The Second World War that followed killed somewhere between 60 and 80 million people. Pull the thread all the way back, through the rubble of 1945, through the trenches of 1916, through the lost provinces of 1871. And you arrive every time at the dinner table in Berlin and a man with a pencil crossing out 12 words. So pull back, what does this single act of editing actually teach us? First, the size of a cause tells you nothing about the size of its effect. 12 deleted words, no new lie, no forged document. Just a man trimming the courtesies out of a polite telegram. And from that tiny, almost invisible act flowed a war. The destruction of a French dynasty, the birth of modern Germany, and a chain reaction that helped detonate the 2 deadliest conflicts in the history of the species. History does not scale its catastrophes to the drama of their origins. The apocalypse can begin with a pencil. Second, the most dangerous people are not the ones who lie. They are the ones who know exactly which truths to leave out. Bismarck never falsified the EMS dispatch. Every word that remained was real. He understood that you do not need to invent a single falsehood to deceive a nation. You only need to control what gets deleted and what gets emphasized, and when it is released, and to whom. He weaponized editing itself. And the bull charged the red rag exactly as he knew it would. Third, engineered crises do not stay engineered. Bismarck got precisely the war he wanted, the empire he wanted, the unified Germany he had dreamed of his entire life. But the forces he unleashed did not stop where he intended them to. The wound he burned into France with Alsace and Lorraine outlived him. The Germany he built grew stronger and more reckless than he could control, and forced him from power. He lit a fire to forge an empire, and the same fire, decades after his death, burned that empire and that continent to the ground. The man who could predict every step of his telegram's effect across 6 weeks could not predict its effect across 60 years. Nobody can, that is the lesson the clever always forget. You can start the fire. You cannot choose where it stops. On the evening of the 13th of July 1870, Otto von Bismarck sat down to dinner in a foul mood, picked up a pencil and deleted 12 words from a telegram. By the 19th of July, France had declared war. By the 2nd of September, Napoleon III was a prisoner and his empire was finished. By the 18th of January 1871, a unified German empire had been proclaimed in the captured Palace of Versailles, By 1918, 17 million people were dead in the trenches. By 1945, 60 to 80 million more were dead in a war that the First War had bred. And it all traces back, link by link by link, to a few lines crossed out at a dinner table with a smile. The telegram itself was a thing of the moment, a scrap of paper long since gone. But the habit it represents is immortal. Somewhere right now, someone is deciding not what to tell you, but what to leave out, which courtesies to cut, which context to delete, which version of a true story to release, and exactly when and to exactly the audience most likely to charge. The MS Dispatch is a useful reminder that the most consequential weapon in human history is not the cannon or the rifle. It is the editor's pencil, in the hands of a man who understands what you will feel before you feel it. And that the things which feel like accidents of history are more often than we want to believe somebody's quiet, smiling design. If you want more episodes that walk through the full causal chain behind events you only half remember from a textbook, subscribe. There is a lot of history to explain